The conservative majority on the Supreme Court has effectively, for now, annihilated the planned student debt relief that Joe Biden rolled out relatively early on in his first term. 6-3 decision by the court's conservative majority derailing that major campaign pledge. Up to 40 million Americans who stood to have up to $20,000 in student debt wiped away will now not. Or will they? Maybe. We're gonna debate it, but as of right now, no, they're not going to. It was gonna happen, and now it's not going to. Reminding everyone of how important every different aspect of government is. Who your president is, whether they're gonna push for student debt elimination, all of it, a little bit of it, a minor amount of it, like Joe Biden, who controls Supreme Court nominees. Very, very important stuff for millions and millions of Americans. So if you haven't been following this back and forth, we're gonna catch you up on what Joe Biden was going to do. He contended that his administration had the authority to forgive student loan debt under the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act of 2003. The law allows the education secretary to waive or modify loan provisions in response to a national emergency, such as the coronavirus pandemic. And so the education secretary, as well as Joe Biden, proposed a plan that would eliminate up to $10,000 for individual student debt borrowers making up to $125,000, double that for married couples, and those who received Pell Grants, a form of financial aid for low and middle income students, would be able to double that to eliminate the $20,000. John Roberts, writing with the majority, said the secretary asserts that the HEROES Act grants him the authority to cancel $430 billion of student loan principal. It does not. We hold today that the act allows the secretary to, quote, waive or modify existing statutory or regulatory provisions applicable to financial assistance programs under the Education Act, not to rewrite that statute from the ground up. And of course, he was joined by all of the conservatives. Get used to that. Particularly for decisions that are important and have implications, monetary, financial implications for wealthy individuals and corporations. And to be clear, I'm not a lawyer. I know you've got your training, obviously. When he says you can do these little changes, but you can't fundamentally recreate it, I see no way in which that means literally anything. They seem to just take issue, I guess, with the amount. They seem to accept that you can cancel debt during a national emergency. We already know, thanks to Donald Trump, it was declared to be an emergency. He just decided to cancel more than had previously been done. And I guess that allows them to define that as a fundamental rewrite of the entire thing. But just, again, get used to this. Like, they're just making stuff up as they go along now. It's never been more clear that they're not divine fonts of judicial wisdom. They're people who theoretically could have ran to be Republican congressmen, but instead they did this.
Yeah, I think that's largely right. And there's two reasons for that. So number one, to John's point about how vague their ruling is, we already know that they have stopped interest payments so that students don't have to pay the interest payments during COVID times. And Trump did that as well. So there's no question that they could stop payments to some degree. So we're just arguing over degrees. And now the Supreme Court decides in their role as activist judges, we don't like the law as you're trying to execute it. We want it to be our version. Well, that's not supposed to be your job, and especially from a conservative perspective. So this is as activist as it gets. Number two, conservatives pretended for forever that they care about the plain reading of the statute, okay? We don't want any activist judges over interpreting, so whatever the statute says is what it is. Well, it says right there, waive or modify. Waive. You could waive it entirely. Waive does not mean partial. Modify means partial. Waive means gone. So the statute, in its plain reading, says you can get rid of all of the debt. The executive can, the president can, if he wants to. And they're like, yeah, but we don't really like the English language anymore. Did we say plain reading before in all of our conservative legal principles? Yeah, never mind, we don't mean it. Which brings me to the final part of this, which is including the other decision they made today, but that's later in the program, they absolutely shredded the concept of legal standing. So the way that works is, in order to sue, you have to actually be affected. You can't be like, oh, Joe harmed Bob and I feel bad about it, so I'm gonna sue. Otherwise, the courts would all be clogged up with irrelevant people who are not actually harmed, right? And in this case, the states, and they took Missouri in particular, they're like, well, if you do student debt relief, there's this debt relief company or debt servicing company, I should say, in our state, and they would make like $10 less, and so they'd pay like 37 cents less in taxes. So we're affected, okay? Like, I'm obviously doing hyperbole on the amounts, but not by that much. So that is as minimal contact with a case as you could possibly have. Okay, wait, now this is a new rule apparently, because that wasn't the old rule on legal standing at all. I mean, they're really stretching like crazy here to get somebody to challenge this law or the execution of this law, because they just didn't agree with the president. And they wanted, it was a political decision based 100% on policy. And so, and of course, their benefactors that pay for all their vacations and homes and all those things also don't want this to be executed. So hey, you got to deliver, otherwise you're not going to be able to catch those giant fish and the beautiful hunting trips, etc. So out it goes. But guys, according to that, and this is important, and unfortunately it'll be an uneven playing field, but the blue states can then go, okay, hey, you passed a conservative law, you did a conservative executive action. The state of California was definitely financially impacted, and we could show how we were financially impacted 10,000 times more than Missouri was in this particular case.
Yep.
So you have set the bar at almost nothing, okay? So that means every blue state should sue on every conservative law ever passed, not just in the future, but go backwards. I don't like that law. I don't like that law. It affected me, and now we have a new rule on standing, which is, I don't really need it. I can just go in and do whatever the hell, sue on whatever the hell I like, okay? Well, look, I didn't set that precedent. The conservative justices set that precedent. So blue states, let's go get an army of lawyers and challenge every goddamn law. Of course they won't because they're Democrats, but they should. Yasmin.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, I mean, what is this? What was it? 40 million Americans are going to be affected by this. Joe Biden's administration is going to be affected by this. This was one of his major campaign promises that he was going to get this done for a lot of people. And a lot of people voted at least in part for him because of that. So it'll be interesting now to see how the whole administration kind of pivots to whatever their next step is. I know that there was some talk about maybe expanding the court, which could help to, palliate the impacts of this very conservative court that clearly is working against what the majority of Americans actually want to happen. But we've yet to see if that's an avenue that Biden will pursue in a meaningful way so far. And I think, a lot of people took solace in the fact that burdening the younger generations with such crippling debt for years and years of their lives is bad for the economy. And if there's anything that motivates leaders in Washington, it's usually money. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be that concerned with future generations. And we've seen them demonstrate that across the board, across several boards, in the form of some of the policies and decisions that are largely, geriatric government has put forth. We know that this will be bad for the economy in the long run. It's already proven to be so. The justices on the Supreme Court know that too. There's no way that we know that here and they don't. That argument isn't gonna work going forward, so we're gonna have to figure something out.
By the way, you mentioned there how it affects Biden. If Trump was in office, how many times would he have already tweeted that this was election interference? They're messing with his chances or whatever.
It's a fake witch hunt, it's a hoax.
Yeah, we're throwing out all these hypotheticals. Of course, we all understand that the Democrats couldn't do the thing that you said because the Supreme Court is not setting up a new standard of damages. In this case, this is what it counts as, and in others, it'll be whatever it needs to be because there's no standards. Because if not, then I think they just effectively made war impossible. You can sue anytime the president sends soldiers to war, because when soldiers are sent to war, some of them die. And when they die, they're not there in the state. And if they're not there, then they don't make money, they don't pay taxes.
That's it.
Ergo, the states have lost tax revenue. It's exactly the same thing as what they're citing.
Financial impact.
It is a direct financial impact. Every single soldier that dies, financial impact, the war is illegal. Again, none of these are standards though.
And John's absolutely right, and you can do it on almost any law, okay? So if Democrats had any sense at all, within a short period of time, they would launch 12 100, 200 lawsuits on every conservative law that has ever passed. Because this is the easiest standard in the world to get standing. And then let the Supreme Court go, yeah, we were liars. We were only giving standing to Republicans and not to Democrats.
Yeah. Well, look, the whole issues with standing and all that, the justices did talk about it. That'll be certainly a conversation going forward. And honestly, later on in the show, when you all are talking about the same-sex marriage ruling, that's even more so. There's no standing whatsoever. It has nothing to do with the person who's actually involved in the case. So again, precedent means nothing, standing means nothing, nothing means anything, except that all of this means that the Supreme Court has been set up as the ultimate final defenders of the status quo. They're there, almost impossible to get rid of, to make sure that nothing happens. And it's why we spent years warning people to not allow the Republicans to take control of the Supreme Court, because it will be used to destroy any hope of progress for years, if not decades, going forward.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.